Captain Kelson stared at his sensor display and felt a cold feeling grow in his stomach. He was an Andromedan officer with blue skin and large black eyes, and he had been monitoring space communications for over 20 years. He had never seen anything like what his instruments were showing him now. "Computer, run a full diagnostic on the long-range communication system," he ordered. "All systems are functioning within normal parameters," the computer replied in its flat mechanical voice. "Then explain why we haven't received any signals from the outer rim colonies in the past 4 days," Kelson said, tapping his clawed fingers nervously on his control panel. His communications officer was a young Centaurian female named Veltar. She had joined his crew only 6 months ago, just before the humans had been expelled from the council. She looked up from her console with worry in her large purple eyes. "Sir, I'm detecting massive interference patterns in sectors 7 through 15. It's like something is deliberately jamming our communications." Kelson felt the cold feeling get worse. The Outer Rim territories were home to millions of council citizens living on dozens of different worlds. If communication with them had been cut off, it could mean serious trouble. "Have you tried using the backup frequencies?" he asked. "Yes, sir, all of them. I've also attempted to route signals through the human relay stations, but—" Veltar paused and looked confused. "Sir, the human relay stations are no longer responding either." That made Kelson remember something he had forgotten. Human communication networks had connected council space for decades. Human technology had made it possible for different alien species to talk to each other across vast distances. Now that the humans were gone, those networks were apparently shutting down. Meanwhile, on the council homeworld of Nexus Prime, Trade Minister Zolkar was discovering problems of his own. He was an Andromedan like Captain Kelson, but older and fatter, with tentacles instead of arms. He spent his days managing trade between the different council species, making sure goods and resources flowed smoothly throughout their territory. "These numbers cannot be correct," he muttered as he studied the latest trade reports. His tentacles waved nervously as he read the data over and over again. His assistant was a Volcran bureaucrat named Kilran, who had worked for the Trade Ministry for 30 years. Volcrans looked like tall, thin humans with gray skin and no hair. They were known for being very good with numbers and details. "The numbers are accurate, Minister," Kilran said in his dry, precise voice. "Interstellar commerce has decreased by 38% since the humans departed council space." Zolkar's tentacles stopped moving and he stared at his assistant. "How is that possible? Humans were only one species out of 47 in the council." "It appears that humans facilitated a much larger portion of interspecies trade than anyone realized," Kilran explained. "They provided translation services, shipping networks, banking systems, and commercial insurance. Many species that traded with each other did so through human intermediaries." The truth was even worse than Kilran understood. Humans had not just facilitated trade between alien species, they had made it possible. Human computers could instantly translate between dozens of alien languages. Human ships could travel faster and carry more cargo than alien vessels. Human banks had developed financial systems that allowed different species with completely different economic structures to do business together. Without humans, the council species were discovering that they could barely communicate with each other, let alone conduct complex trade negotiations. On the industrial world of Metalos, factory manager Cretan was facing a crisis that he did not understand. Cretan was a Zoridian with purple skin and 3 eyes, and he had been running automated factories for 15 years. The factories produced everything from household appliances to spacecraft components, using advanced robotic systems that had worked perfectly for decades. Now those systems were failing and none of his technicians could figure out why. "The primary assembly line has stopped working again," reported his chief engineer, a nervous Kalarian named Buzzik. "The control systems keep generating error messages that we cannot interpret." Cretan walked over to look at the main control panel. The display was filled with symbols and text that looked familiar but somehow made no sense. He had seen these interfaces thousands of times before, but now he realized that he had never actually understood how they worked. "Call in a specialist, team from the technical guild," he ordered. 3 days later, the specialists arrived and spent hours examining the factory systems. Their leader was an elderly Andromedan engineer who had worked with automated systems for 50 years. "I'm afraid there's nothing we can do," the specialist reported. "These systems were designed and programmed by humans. We never learned the underlying principles of how they operate. We simply used the interfaces that the humans provided for us." Cretan felt like he had been hit by a meteor. "Are you saying that every factory on Metalos is dependent on human technology?" "Not just on Metalos," the specialist replied grimly. "Human-designed automation systems are used throughout Council space. Without human technicians to maintain them, they will all eventually fail." The same realization was spreading across Council territory, as alien administrators discovered how deeply human technology had penetrated their civilization. Human-designed computer networks connected their cities. Human-engineered life support systems kept their space stations habitable. Human-created medical equipment operated in their hospitals. Back on Nexus Prime, Chancellor Vextar was beginning to understand the magnitude of the problem. He sat in his private office reviewing reports from across Council space, and each report brought worse news than the last. His aide, a competent Centaurian named Poltar, entered the office carrying another stack of urgent messages. "More bad news?" Vextar asked wearily. "I'm afraid so, Chancellor. We've lost contact with 12 more Outer Rim colonies. 3 major trade routes have been shut down due to equipment failures, and the Central Medical Authority is reporting critical shortages of several important medicines." "What medicines?" Vextar demanded. "Ones that were manufactured exclusively by human pharmaceutical companies," Poltar replied. Apparently, humans were the only species that had mastered the production of certain complex chemical compounds. Vextar put his head in his hands. When the Council had voted to expel humanity, they had thought they were getting rid of a dangerous and aggressive species that threatened galactic peace. They had not realized that humans had become the foundation that held their entire civilization together. "Sir," Poltar continued hesitantly, "there's something else. We've been receiving reports of unusual activity in the Outer Rim sectors." "What kind of unusual activity?" "Ships appearing on long-range sensors and then vanishing. Strange energy readings from empty space. Some colonies have reported seeing unknown vessels before their communications went dark." Vextar looked up sharply. "Could these be human ships? Are they violating the terms of their expulsion?" Poltar shook his head. "The energy signatures don't match any known human technology. These ships appear to be using completely different principles of propulsion and stealth." For the first time since the humans had left, Vextar began to wonder if the Council had made a terrible mistake. He was starting to suspect that there might be threats in the galaxy that the Council had never known about, threats that had somehow been kept away from Council space. But if such threats existed, who had been protecting them from those dangers? And what would happen now that those protectors were gone? Jake Morrison stood in the middle of the huge crystal hall and looked at the alien faces staring down at him. The Galactic Council chamber was bigger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. 47 different alien species sat in their seats high above him. Their eyes, tentacles, and other strange body parts all pointed in his direction. The air smelled like metal and something sweet that made his nose itch. Behind Jake stood Lisa Parker, the human ambassador to the Council. She held her datapad, tight in her hands, but kept her face calm. Both humans wore their best blue uniforms with the Earth symbol on their shoulders. They had known this day might come, but had hoped they were wrong. Chancellor Vextar was the leader of the Council. He was a Zeridian with 3 purple eyes and skin that looked like old leather. He stood up from his tall chair and his voice filled the entire hall when he spoke. The translation device in Jake's ear turned the alien words into English that he could understand. "The human species has been found guilty of being too violent and too dangerous for the Galactic Council," Vextar said. His 3 eyes seemed to glow with happiness. "Your people start wars too often and refuse to follow our rules. You are not fit to be part of civilized space." Jake wanted to laugh but kept his face blank. The aliens thought humans were violent, but they had no idea what humans had really been doing for the past 50 years. While the Council spent their time in meetings and writing new laws, human ships had been fighting battles in the dark corners of space that these aliens never even knew existed. The Calarian delegate stood up next. Her name was Zoran Prime, and she looked like a giant insect with blue skin. Her voice was high and sharp like breaking glass. Humans have built too many weapons and refuse to share their technology with the Council. This shows they cannot be trusted to work with peaceful species. Jake almost smiled when he heard that. The aliens wanted human technology, but they were also afraid of it. Human weapons were better than anything the Council had ever seen. Human ships could go faster and farther than alien vessels. Human computers could solve problems that alien minds could not even understand. But instead of trying to learn from humans, the Council had decided to get rid of them. "We have made our decision," Vextar continued. "Humanity has 60 standard days to remove all military ships, trading posts, and colonies from Council space. Any human who stays after this time will be considered an enemy of the Council." The hall filled with excited chatter from the alien delegates. They spoke in dozens of different languages, but Jake could hear the satisfaction in their voices. They thought they had solved a big problem by getting rid of the humans. A fat alien with tentacles instead of arms spoke up from his seat. Jake recognized him as Trade Minister Zolkar from the Andromedan Federation. "Perhaps in a few hundred years, when your species has learned to be more peaceful, you may ask to join us again." That made several aliens laugh with sounds like honking geese and grinding metal. They thought it was funny that humans might someday beg to come back to the Council. Jake finally spoke, and his voice was calm and steady. "We understand your decision. We will begin moving our people and equipment immediately." Ambassador Parker stepped forward and placed a small device on the floor. It projected a hologram that showed every human colony, trading post, and military base in Council space. There were hundreds of them scattered across 40 different star systems. "This is a complete list of all human installations in your territory," Parker said. "We will evacuate them all within the required time." Some of the aliens looked surprised at how many human bases there were. They had not realized that humans had spread so far through Council space. Others looked pleased that they would soon own all the worlds and space stations that humans had built. Jake touched a small button on his uniform sleeve. It sent an encrypted message to Admiral Kate Sullivan, who was waiting on the UES Enterprise, just outside the solar system. The message was simple: "Operation Exodus approved. Begin Phase 1. "Is there anything else the Council requires?" Jake asked politely. Vextar waved one of his clawed hands. "No, you are dismissed. We expect your species to honor this agreement completely." Jake and Parker bowed slightly and turned to leave the hall. As they walked toward the exit, Jake could hear the aliens already discussing how they would divide up the human territories among themselves. The Zeridians wanted the mining colonies. The Calarians claimed the agricultural worlds. The Andromedans argued over who would get the human space stations. None of them noticed the small smile on Jake's face as he left the chamber. None of them wondered why the humans had agreed so easily to leave. None of them asked why Jake seemed almost happy about being kicked out of the Council. If they had been smarter, they might have realized that humans had been preparing for this day for a very long time. Secret shipyards hidden in asteroid fields had been building new types of vessels with technology that would have amazed and terrified the Council. Research stations in empty space had been developing weapons and defenses that were far beyond anything the aliens could imagine. The Council thought they were getting rid of a problem, but they had no idea what they were really doing. They were about to learn that humans had not been the biggest threat in the galaxy. Humans had been the only thing standing between the Council and much worse dangers that lived in the dark spaces between the stars. But that knowledge would come later. For now, the aliens celebrated their victory while Jake and Parker walked back to their ship. In 60 days, every human would be gone from Council space. The aliens would get exactly what they had asked for. They would soon regret it. Dr. Ben Carter moved his hands quickly over the glowing control panel as data flowed from the laboratory computers into portable storage units. Around him, his research team worked fast to pack up equipment that had taken them years to build and test. The Kepler Station Research Facility was one of the most advanced scientific outposts in Council space, and now they had to tear it all down in just a few weeks. "How much time do we have left, Doc?" asked Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez. He was a young soldier who had been assigned to guard the station. Sweat ran down his face as he helped carry heavy machines toward the transport ships. "About 3 hours before the last ship leaves," Carter said without looking up from his work. "Make sure you wipe all the computer systems after we finish copying the data. I don't want these aliens to learn anything from our research." The research at Kepler Station would have shocked the Council if they had known about it. Carter and his team had been studying alien technology for decades, not to copy it, but to understand its weaknesses. They had also been developing new types of weapons that used principles the Council species had never discovered. The aliens thought human technology was primitive compared to theirs, but they were very wrong. Far across the galaxy, similar scenes were happening on dozens of human worlds and space stations. On the mining colony called New Denver, Foreman Pete Williams watched as huge machines dug valuable metals from deep underground. These machines were being taken apart piece by piece and loaded onto cargo ships. The aliens had always been amazed at how humans could extract resources from planets that other species thought were worthless. "Are we really leaving all this behind?" asked one of the miners as he watched a massive drilling machine being lifted by a crane. "We're not leaving it behind," Williams replied with a grin. "We're taking it with us. Every bolt, every wire, every computer chip. When we're done, there won't be anything left here but empty holes in the ground." The mining operation at New Denver produced rare elements that were essential for building advanced spacecraft engines. The Council had never learned how to mine these materials efficiently, so they had always depended on human colonies to supply them. Soon they would discover what it was like to try to build spaceships without these crucial resources. On the agricultural world called Haven, Governor Mary Chen supervised the evacuation of 3,000 farmers and their families. Haven had once been a dry, lifeless planet, but human terraforming technology had turned it into a garden world that could feed millions of people. The aliens had always wondered how humans could make dead planets come alive, but humans had never shared their secrets. "What about the crops?" asked one of the farmers as he loaded his family onto a transport ship. "Leave them," Chen replied. "Let the aliens try to figure out how to keep them growing without our genetically modified seeds and automated farming systems." The farmer looked confused. "But won't the crops die without proper care?" Chen nodded. "Probably within a few months. The soil conditioning needs constant adjustment, and the irrigation systems require maintenance that only human technicians know how to perform." Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UES Enterprise and reviewed reports coming in from across human space. Every military base, every trading post, every research facility was being systematically dismantled and evacuated. To outside observers, it looked like humans were simply following the Council's orders and leaving quietly. "All military assets have been withdrawn to the Sol system, Admiral," reported Commander Rick Hayes, her aide. "Every ship, every space station, every defensive platform. We've also canceled all defense contracts with Council species." What the Council did not know was that humans had been preparing for this possibility for 50 years. While the aliens spent their time in political meetings and diplomatic ceremonies, human engineers had been secretly building new types of spacecraft in hidden shipyards scattered throughout uninhabited star systems. These ships used technology that was centuries ahead of anything the Council possessed. The withdrawal looked peaceful and orderly from the outside, but it was actually the most complex military operation in human history. Thousands of ships moved in carefully coordinated patterns, picking up personnel and equipment from hundreds of locations spread across dozens of star systems. Every movement was planned down to the minute to ensure that nothing valuable would be left behind for the aliens to find. Dr. Carter finished downloading the last of his research data and looked around the empty laboratory. The room that had once been filled with advanced equipment and busy scientists was now just bare walls and empty floors. He activated a small device that would completely destroy any remaining data in the station's computers. "Ready to go, Doc?" Rodriguez asked. "Almost," Carter replied. He pulled a small metal cylinder from his pocket and placed it on a table. "This is a gift for our alien friends. It contains a complete record of all the research we've been doing here." Rodriguez looked surprised. "I thought you said we shouldn't leave anything behind." Carter smiled. "This isn't our real research. It's fake data designed to send the aliens down the wrong path if they try to continue our work. They'll waste years trying to make it work before they realize it's all nonsense. Similar deceptions were being left throughout human territories. Fake technical manuals, sabotaged equipment, and computer viruses disguised as helpful software. The Council thought they were inheriting valuable human infrastructure, but they were actually getting elaborate traps that would cause them problems for years to come. On the fortress world of Gibraltar, General Linda Scott oversaw the deactivation of the massive defense network that had protected Council space from external threats for decades. The aliens had never known about these defenses because they had been built and operated entirely by humans. As far as the Council knew, their space was naturally safe from invasion. "Shutting down the last sensor array now, General," reported her communications officer. "Good," Scott replied. "Make sure the shutdown looks like a normal equipment failure. I don't want the aliens to realize that these systems ever existed." The defense network had been detecting and destroying hostile alien ships from outside Council space for 40 years. The Council species had never seen these threats because human forces had eliminated them before they could reach populated systems. Now those defenses were going dark, and whatever came from the outer darkness would find nothing standing in their way. As the last human transport ships departed from Council territory, they left behind empty worlds, abandoned space stations, and confused alien observers who were only beginning to realize what they had lost. The exodus was complete, efficient, and absolutely silent. Behind them, the clock was already ticking on the Council's future. 1 year after humanity's departure, Chancellor Vextar walked into the Galactic Council chamber and felt sick to his stomach. The great hall that had once been filled with confident alien delegates from 47 different species now echoed with the worried voices of barely 20 representatives. Empty seats stretched in long rows where proud civilizations had once sat to discuss the future of the galaxy. Vextar's purple skin had grown pale over the past months, and his 3 eyes showed the strain of sleepless nights spent trying to solve problems that seemed to have no solutions. He activated the main holographic display and waited for the remaining Council members to quiet down. "Fellow delegates," he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "we face an emergency unlike anything in our recorded history." Admiral Krelthar of the Council Defense Force stood up from his seat. He was a massive Kalarian with blue chitinous skin and 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. As the military leader of the Council, he had been dealing with increasingly desperate reports from across their shrinking territory. "The situation is beyond critical," Krelthar announced, his voice clicking and buzzing in the way that Kalarians spoke when they were agitated. "We have lost contact with 78 colonies in the past 6 months. 17 complete star systems have gone dark. Our defense fleets report encountering hostile vessels of unknown origin, and many of our ships have simply vanished without sending any distress signals." The holographic display changed to show a map of Council space. Red zones marked areas where contact had been lost. Yellow zones showed regions under threat, and green zones indicated areas that were still considered safe. The amount of red on the map was shocking. More than half of Council territory was now colored in danger zones. "What do we know about these attackers?" demanded Trade Minister Zolkar. His tentacles writhed nervously as he spoke. The collapse of interstellar commerce had made his job nearly impossible, and he looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 12 months. "Very little," Admiral Krelthar admitted. "The attacking ships use technology that our sensors cannot properly analyze. They appear without warning, strike with devastating force, and disappear before our response fleets can arrive. We have found no survivors and no wreckage that we can study." A Centaurian delegate named Yilson raised her hand to speak. She was the Council's chief scientist and had been trying to understand the nature of the attacks. "Based on the evidence we have collected, these vessels appear to use some form of advanced stealth technology, combined with weapons that can completely destroy matter at the molecular level. The attack patterns suggest multiple different species, or factions working together." "Multiple species?" Vextar asked with alarm. "How many different enemies are we facing?" "At least 4 distinct types of hostile vessels have been identified," Yilson replied. "Each uses different technology and tactics. It's as if several different alien civilizations have decided to invade Council space simultaneously." The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed this terrifying information. The idea that multiple unknown species were attacking them from different directions was almost too frightening to consider. "There's more," Admiral Krelthar continued grimly. "Our intelligence analysis suggests that these attacks have been going on for much longer than we initially realized. We found evidence of similar incidents dating back decades, but they were apparently dealt with before reaching our core territories." "Dealt with by whom?" asked a Volcran delegate. The silence that followed answered the question without words. Everyone in the chamber was beginning to reach the same horrible conclusion. Communications Officer Veltar, who had been promoted to Chief of Interstellar Communications after her superior had suffered a nervous breakdown, stood up slowly. She was young for such a high position, but the crisis had forced rapid promotions throughout the council hierarchy. "We have attempted to contact humanity through every available channel," she reported. "All human frequencies have gone completely silent. We've sent diplomatic ships to their former territories, but every world they once occupied has been abandoned." "What do you mean abandoned?" Vextar demanded. "Not destroyed, sir. Abandoned. The colonies are intact but empty. The cities are undamaged, but contain no people. It's as if humanity simply packed up everything they could carry and left for an unknown destination." Dr. Yilsen activated her own holographic display, showing data that had taken her team months to compile. "We have analyzed energy signatures and ship movements from the period before humanity's departure. Our findings are disturbing." The display showed a complex pattern of ship movements in the dark spaces between star systems. Thousands of human vessels had been operating in areas that the Council had never explored, fighting battles that no one else had known were happening. "It appears that human military forces were engaged in active combat operations throughout the outer regions of our galaxy," Yilsen explained. "Based on debris analysis and energy readings, these conflicts involved the same hostile species that are now attacking our colonies." The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Humanity had not been preparing for war against the Council. They had been fighting a war to protect the Council from enemies that the aliens had never even detected. "Are you saying that humans were defending us?" asked a shocked Andromedan delegate. "The evidence strongly suggests that human forces were acting as a buffer zone between Council space and multiple hostile alien civilizations," Yilsen confirmed. "They were apparently fighting this war for decades without our knowledge or assistance." "Chancellor," Vextar felt his legs grow weak and he sat down heavily in his chair. The full magnitude of the Council's mistake was finally becoming clear. They had expelled the very species that had been protecting them from annihilation. "But why didn't they tell us?" he whispered. Historian Telvan, one of the few scholars remaining on the Council, spoke for the first time during the session. She was an ancient Zoridian whose knowledge of galactic history was unmatched. "Perhaps they tried to tell us and we refused to listen," she said quietly. "How many times did human delegates warn us about threats from unexplored space? How many times did they request permission to expand their military presence in border regions? We always accused them of being too aggressive and denied their requests. The truth was bitter but undeniable. Every time humans had tried to warn the Council about external threats, the aliens had dismissed their concerns as warmongering. When humans had asked for resources to build defenses in remote areas, the Council had accused them of trying to expand their territory illegally. "Our trade networks are collapsing," Zolkar reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Entire species have withdrawn from the Council to defend their own homeworlds. The economic system that took centuries to build is falling apart in months. Our colonies are being evacuated faster than we can organize rescue fleets," added another delegate. "Millions of civilians are fleeing toward the core worlds, but we don't have the resources to house and feed them all." Admiral Krelthar brought up another holographic display showing the current disposition of Council military forces. "Our defense fleets are spread so thin that we can barely protect our most important worlds. Every time we send ships to investigate a distress signal, we lose more vessels to these unknown attackers." The chamber was filled with the quiet desperation of leaders who had finally realized that they were facing a crisis beyond their ability to solve. The proud galactic civilization that had existed for thousands of years was crumbling around them, and they had brought this destruction upon themselves by casting out their protectors. "Is there any way to contact them?" Vexitar asked desperately. "Any way to apologize and ask for their help?" Veltar shook her head sadly. "We have no idea where they went. Human ships were detected leaving Council space in all directions, but after that, they simply vanished. It's as if they found a way to become completely invisible to our sensors." As the emergency session ended and the delegates prepared to return to their increasingly desperate homeworlds, one question haunted them all. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, were the humans still watching? And if they were, would they ever forgive the Council for the terrible mistake that had doomed them all? 5 years had passed since humanity's quiet departure from Council space, and Chancellor Vextar could barely recognize the civilization he had once helped to lead. He stood at the window of his office on Nexus Prime and looked out at a city that was slowly dying. Half the buildings were dark and empty, their alien inhabitants having fled to safer worlds closer to the galactic core. The streets that had once bustled with representatives from dozens of different species now echoed with the footsteps of refugees and the desperate. The Galactic Council chamber itself had become a monument to failure, where 47 proud species had once gathered to govern the galaxy. Now only 12 delegates remained. The others had either withdrawn from the Council entirely or had been destroyed by the relentless attacks that continued to sweep through what remained of civilized space. Vextar's reflection in the window showed an alien who had aged decades in just 5 years. His purple skin had turned gray, his 3 eyes were dim with exhaustion, and his once proud bearing had been broken by the weight of impossible decisions. He had called one final emergency session of the Council, though he suspected it would be the last one ever held. As he entered the chamber, the sight of all those empty seats hit him like a physical blow. In the center of the circular assembly, one chair stood out more than all the others, the seat that had once been occupied by human representatives. The chair was exactly as it had been left 5 years ago, a silent reminder of the species that the Council had cast out in their arrogance and fear. The few remaining delegates took their seats with the quiet desperation of leaders who knew they were presiding over the end of their civilization. Admiral Krelthar looked exhausted and defeated, his blue chitinous armor scarred from battles that could not be won. Trade Minister Zolkar had grown thin and pale, his tentacles hanging limp, as he contemplated the complete collapse of interstellar commerce. "Fellow delegates," Vextar began, his voice barely carrying across the vast empty chamber, "we must face the truth about what we have done." Dr. Yilson activated the main holographic display, showing the current state of what had once been Council space. The map was now mostly red, with only tiny green islands of safety scattered across the galaxy. The yellow zones that had once indicated areas under threat had either turned red or simply gone dark, as communication was lost entirely. "Our latest analysis confirms what we have long suspected," Yilson reported. "The hostile species that are attacking us have been contained or defeated by human military forces for at least 60 years. We have found evidence of massive battles fought in the outer regions of our galaxy, conflicts that involved millions of ships and lasted for decades." She brought up another display showing reconstructed battle maps based on debris fields and energy signatures that had been discovered by long-range scouts. The scope of the warfare was staggering. Entire star systems had been turned into battlegrounds where human forces had fought against multiple alien invasions. The humans were not just defending Council space, Yilson continued. They were fighting a galaxy-wide war against civilizations that view organic life as something to be consumed or destroyed. Based on our analysis, at least 8 different hostile species have been attempting to invade this region of the galaxy for the past century. Admiral Krelthar stood up slowly, his movement stiff with exhaustion and old wounds. "Our remaining defense fleets are no longer capable of meaningful resistance. We lose ships faster than we can build them, and our enemies seem to have unlimited resources. In the past month alone, we have lost 43 vessels without inflicting any significant damage on the attackers." The numbers were devastating, but they only told part of the story. The Council had discovered that their weapons were almost useless against the invading fleets. Human technology had been centuries ahead of anything the aliens possessed, and without that technological edge, the Council forces were like primitive warriors facing modern armies. "What about our attempts to reverse engineer human technology?" asked a Centaurian delegate. Dr. Yilson shook her head sadly. "Complete failure. The human devices that were left behind appear to be deliberately sabotaged. Every time our technicians think they understand how something works, it either stops functioning or explodes. We believe the humans programmed their abandoned equipment to prevent us from learning their secrets." Communications Officer Veltar had been promoted again, now holding the title of Director of Emergency Communications. She stood to deliver, her report with the hollow expression of someone who had given up hope. "We have detected no human transmissions anywhere in the galaxy," she announced. "Our deep space monitoring stations have been scanning constantly for 5 years without finding any trace of human activity. It's as if they have vanished completely from this region of space." "Could they have left the galaxy entirely?" Vextar asked. "It's possible," Veltar replied. "Human ships were capable of faster-than-light travel that our vessels cannot match. They could have traveled to distant galaxies and established new colonies beyond our ability to detect. The idea that humanity had simply abandoned this entire galaxy to its fate was almost too terrible to consider. It suggested that the humans had written off the Council as hopeless and decided to start over somewhere else, rather than waste any more effort protecting ungrateful aliens. Historian Telvan spoke from her seat near the back of the chamber. She was ancient even by Zoridian standards, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had studied the rise and fall of civilizations for centuries. "We must consider the possibility that this outcome was inevitable," she said quietly. "Our analysis of historical records shows that humanity tried repeatedly to warn us about external threats. They requested resources for border defense, proposed joint military exercises, and suggested research partnerships that might have prepared us for these attacks." She activated a display showing dozens of official documents, human proposals, that had been rejected by the Council over the decades. The pattern was clear and damning. Every time humans had tried to share their knowledge or prepare the Council for danger, the aliens had refused to listen. "We accused them of being warlike, when they were actually the only species willing to fight for peace," Telvan continued. "We called them aggressive when they were standing guard against true aggression. We expelled them for being dangerous when they were the only thing keeping us safe from real danger." The silence in the chamber was broken only by the distant sound of evacuation sirens from the city outside. Another refugee convoy was preparing to flee toward the core worlds, carrying civilians who had lost everything to the advancing alien fleets. Trade Minister Zolkar finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The economic collapse is total. Interstellar trade has dropped to less than 5% of pre-Exodus levels. 17 member species have declared bankruptcy. 9 have reverted to primitive barter systems. The financial networks that connected our civilization have simply ceased to function." "How long can the core worlds hold out?" Vextar asked. "At current consumption rates, perhaps 2 more years," Zolkar replied. "After that, we will run out of the resources necessary to maintain our technology. We are becoming a pre-space flight civilization again." Admiral Krelthar brought up a tactical display showing the positions of the remaining Council fleets. The ships were clustered around a handful of heavily defended systems, forming a shrinking perimeter around the most important worlds. "We are fighting a purely defensive war with no hope of victory," he reported. "Every engagement costs us ships we cannot replace, while our enemies seem to have unlimited reinforcements. The mathematics are simple. We will be completely overwhelmed within 18 months. Dr. Yilson had one final revelation that made the situation even more hopeless. "Our analysis of the attacking fleet suggests that they are not using their full strength against us. Based on the size and power of the forces we have observed, we estimate that we are facing less than 10% of their total military capability." Implications were staggering. The aliens that were systematically destroying Council civilization were barely making an effort. They were treating the conquest of their territory as a minor cleanup operation rather than a serious military campaign. Why? Aren't they using their full strength? Vextar asked. Because they don't need to, Yilson replied simply. Without human resistance, we pose no significant threat to them. They can afford to take their time and conserve their resources for whatever other conflicts they might be fighting elsewhere. As the session drew to a close, the delegates sat in stunned silence, contemplating the complete magnitude of their civilization's collapse. Everything they had built over thousands of years was crumbling around them, and they had brought this destruction upon themselves through their own pride and ignorance. Chancellor Vextar stood and walked to the center of the chamber, stopping directly in front of the empty human chair. He placed his hand on the armrest and felt the cold metal that had once supported representatives of the species that could have saved them all. If there are any humans still listening, he said quietly, though he knew that no one was monitoring council communications anymore, we are sorry. We were wrong about everything.